Salam and welcome to Somali Dispatch, somalidispatch.com. My name is Guled. Somali Independence Week has long been a wedge issue among Somalis in both Somaliland and Somalia. The week should have been celebrated for the great achievement that it is, but it has not been for the past 31 years. As we all know, Somaliland celebrated independence from Britain on June 26, 1960, while Somalia commemorated June 26 and July 1st for both independence from Italy and the unification between the North and the South. Somali Independence Week divisions are led by the old guard, who seem to be on a path to disunity since the collapse of the Somali Republic 1991. Is it time for the younger generation to take lead in these discussions? We put this and other questions to Mohamed Warsame, an academic, a writer, and a poet who lives in the UK, and Guled Ahmed Jama, a human rights lawyer who lives in Hargeisa. Gentlemen, I'd like to take the moment to welcome you and thank you for your time today.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And given the state of Somalis, what does Independence Week mean? As you all know, we've been celebrating June 26, and then just yesterday we celebrated July 1st, which commemorated the unification of both South and North. What does, in terms of your generations, gentlemen, what does this week mean to you? I'll go with Mohamed first.
I personally think there are I think you can regard everything from a lateral perspective. So you have linear thinking and you have lateral thinking, and I believe that Somalis are quite diverse in their views. But for my generation, what I've observed is there are mainly two different types of young Somalis, at least for my generation. The first one regard the nationalism and the independence and being kind of proud of your nation. They regard it as a way of manifesting their identity, as a way of showing that they're proud of where they come from, that they're proud to be Somalis from Somalia, or that they're proud to be Somalis from Somaliland or Djibouti. So they have the flag and the face, right, on social media, where they showcase who they are. And I think there are also some individuals or some young people who kind of want to honor the struggle of the ancestors, and who want to highlight their stories as opposed to just showing their face and their flag and kind of showing who they are, trying to kind of put themselves onto the forefront. They want to highlight those who have struggled for independence, those who have, like, for example, Sheikh Barsana, for example. I've seen quite a few people show his face, or Haji Adan Afqalo, and Ilahu Naharis, all of them. May Allah rest their souls in peace. So I see these different strands, and I also think, this is my interpretation, I also think a bit of it is virtue signaling, like a bit of it is really empty kind of performative patriotism. So for me personally, it's great to be proud of who you are, but at the same time, showing a flag, what is the intrinsic value of that? I think for me personally, what I saw during Independence Week, the best of it, or the best of what my young generation has shown, was those who honored those who struggled for independence. And so many of us young people also kind of felt a peer pressure, right? A sense of duty forced upon them. So independence means for us to find our identity, or to manifest our identity, to think of the past as a way of reuniting with one another, as a way of kind of reminding ourselves what we've been through, and that we need to kind of continue the torch. So they passed on the torch, and we need to continue doing this. But at the same time, there's a lot of it that is artificial, a lot of it that is really performative. And so there definitely needs to be a conversation to be had by young people. Is this really what we want? Is this the type of nationalism that we think is right, to just wave flags and show who we are? So I think we need to have lofty goals. And so at least that's what it means for me. For me, it was a day where I asked myself, okay, everyone is showing who they are. Everyone is showing their patriots. They're showing their nationalism, their pride, and so on and so forth. But what have you done? So I was reflecting more than I was kind of showing on. If you look at my Twitter or my social media, you won't find these flag waving and all of this stuff, but I genuinely ask myself, what have you done? What could you show in terms of patriotism? And I think we need to definitely, as a collective, think of the practical elements or the practical angle, and really ask ourselves, if I'm a nationalist, if I'm a patriot, what have I done for my country?
Right. Guled Ahmed Jama, your perspective, you're currently in Hargeisa, where, people celebrated 26 June 1960, which is when Somaliland, or the northern regions, took their independence from Britain. What was that like at your end?
Thank you very much. The issue of independence in the Somali context is very controversial and politically charged. And that is because it is most of the time celebrated as a manifestation of the reality, Somali's reality on today, not on how things were in 1960. The people who fought for independence prior to 1960 were looking for Somalis who are united and independent from the colonial powers who ruled their land and exploited their natural resources. Therefore, they want a country that was independent, democratic, and prosperous. But things went wrong in 1969 when the military left their barracks and occupied the civilian administration, and then the country descended into chaos and anarchy and war. And that's what we live today. Therefore, 26 June is celebrating Hargeisa and Mogadishu in a different day and for different purpose. For Somaliland, the talk is always about that the union was wrong and we handed over our independence to Somalia and then we got betrayed. But in Mogadishu, the issue is that things went well and reunification is possibility. And a question I have for myself is Somalia really independent today? There are more troops in Somalia than there were in the 1950s. The African Union, IGAD, the UN, the EU, all of these powerful countries have a voice and influence in Mogadishu. The government in Mogadishu is trying to put a foot on the ground, but regional administrations exist, at least to say, very different and autonomous from central government. Al-Shabaab and others are running the country. Therefore, is this what the freedom fighters wanted? And I think that's not what we wanted. Therefore, things went wrong. Therefore, in order to celebrate, I think it's better to ask questions and say what went wrong and how we can correct our mistakes. Because there's nothing to celebrate for. People are dying for war and hunger, and something went wrong. Something went wrong because some leaders made mistakes, and that need to be corrected.
Right. As we all know, there are plenty of issues on both sides, both in Hargeisa and in Mogadishu. Given the situation in Somaliland, for example, Guled, what do you most attribute to the state of Somalis in Somaliland today?
I think generally the situation of Somalis is a fiasco. It's a total failure. We got our independence in 1960, but after 61 years, we live in a situation that is not what we want it to be. In Somalia, as I said, there's a war and conflict. In Somaliland, there's internal sovereignty. We have a government elected by the people. Elections are held. Peace exists. Things are running well. But we lack international recognition, which means we're not able to connect with international forums, the international financial and trade systems. So we are crippled in that way. And the political debate within the Somali environment is not well articulated. It's most of the time heated, emotional, it's not rational, it's not about how we make our lives better, it is always about positions. And therefore, I think the future could be better, but it could be only better if the current generation starts asking questions and to detach themselves from the passive failure. But if we become stuck with passive failure and continue defending mistakes made by our earlier ancestors or fathers and grandfathers, we'll be living a reality that's not ours.
Would you agree to some of the issues that Somalilanders are fearing currently are related to the decision to declare independence in '91? And if so, what is the way forward?
I think it is related to a number of factors. I think it cannot be attributed into only one incident. It goes back to 1960. The union was hasty. It lacked agreements, any certain written form of agreement, and the union therefore failed because there was no rules. There was no agreement, and what the people in Somaliland expected from the union didn't happen. All the power was taken by our brothers and sisters in Somalia, the president, the prime minister, and all the key leadership positions. And we become dissatisfied with the union. And then the military came, subjugated the people of Somalia, channelized the more to the people in Somaliland. What happened in the 1980s, in 1989 and 90s, live with us in Somaliland. And then the Declaration of Independence happened in 1991. All of that are factors, a series of incidences that happened that have impacted either positively or negatively on how life is in today in Somalia. Therefore, I am among the people who believe the Declaration of Independence in 1991 was right one, it's a legitimate one, but I have many questions about how the country is run afterwards and the direction taken by the leaders in order to steer the country in a positive direction. I think that's where questions are in Somalia.
Okay, Mohamed Warsame, similar question. What would you most attribute to the state of Somalis in Somalia and in the Horn of Africa in general?
I think so. From the perspective of Somalia, I think the state at the moment I think Guled was right in the sense that there is still a conflict. There's large swaths of Somali territories in the hands of terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab. But I honestly believe we should not kind of paint Somalia as a whole with one brush. I think we need to qualify statements. We need to also acknowledge that some regions have achieved relative prosperity. Some regions have achieved relative self-autonomy. For example, the Puntland region of Somalia does not reflect the state of many parts of southern Somalia. So to speak of Somalia as this completely crippled place where nothing works and everything is just doom and gloom, I think that is not a true reflection of reality. Of course, at the moment we are battling with terrorism. We are battling with terrorist attacks on a daily basis. So the Somali government, the Somali central government, is not independent, is not really independent, because the military still depends a lot on, for example, AMISOM. So whenever AMISOM troops pull out of certain regions, there's an outcry. So there's a lot of blame also aimed or directed at the AU, the African Union. So from a perspective of someone from Somalia, I of course am, in a way, I want to honor and also respect those who tried their best to make do with the collapse of central government. So the mistakes of, for example, the military regime, and the mistakes of the 70s and 80s and all of that history, for example, the irredentism and the approach to trying to reunite or to create the reality of this dream of Somaliland, of greater Somalia. All of these things definitely had a negative impact on reality today. So I think Somalia is in a very, very fragile position to deal with all of these challenges at the same time, to deal with this question of reunification, because as Somalis, we also believe we think, I mean, it's an idea that territorial integrity, the concept of territorial integrity, the concept of this, if you look at the dreams of our great-grandparents to achieve a unified Somali nation, and where things are headed now, the fragmentation and all of these things are, in my view, they are a cloud in the mind of the Somali from Somalia. Of course, I wholeheartedly agree with Guled that the Somaliland part has a completely different view, and that's rightfully so, because the experience has been very different. The experience has been different from the moment independence happened in 1960 to the military regime, to all the mistakes that were done. So the experiences are different, and I'm glad that you try to bring both of these perspectives. But to wrap up my statement, I think Somalis in Somalia are working hard. They're sacrificing. They're doing all they can to revive their broken nationhood. And it would be unfair of outsiders, and especially of our Somali brothers and sisters in other parts of the Horn, to just, you know, to keep this narrative that feeds the egos of those who are happy with it, to keep this narrative alive, but to qualify things and to acknowledge there is progress coming, but there are also a lot of issues that need to be addressed. And so that's at least my assessment and my perspective.
So in prioritizing the progress that the nation needs, Mohamed, where would reunification rank? Like, where would you, if you were an average Somali in Somalia, let's say, where would reunification fit as opposed to the other state building and terrorism issues that you just mentioned, and with the rift with Kenya as well? Where would reunification fit into that progress ranking, if you will?
For me, this question of reunification, of course, for Somalilanders, this is out of question for many Somalilanders, but we also need to understand that there are Somalilanders who still believe in this idea of unionism, despite everything that happened. I think this concept of unionism at the moment on the plate of things, it is not on rank number one. So on rank number one, of course, and it depends really on who you ask. But if you ask me as an individual, as somebody who thinks about Somalis' problems, who writes about the problems of Somalis, I think the idea of territorial integrity and the idea of ensuring that this sacred land that has been given to us, that it is, you know, that it is preserved as a whole, it's not on number one. It definitely lingers in the background. It is there for me personally. Again, I'm speaking only for myself. Of course, if you wanted to make a study of this and you wanted to gather together data or make a survey, things would look very different. But for me, I think the biggest priority for Somalia at the moment should be to achieve sustainability and self-sufficiency, so that we can take ownership of to continue on this what we call this trajectory or this path to revival. So we need to take ownership of security, bit by bit from AMISOM, and we need to make sure that we defeat terrorism, this threat of terrorism that is killing Somalis on a weekly basis. We need to ensure that security in every part of the current hotspots of terrorism, like southwest state, like Hirshabelle, like Galmudug, and also parts of Jubaland. So once we have eradicated Al-Shabaab from these areas, and once we have taken ownership again of security, that's when we can think about reviving the state, and that's when we can think about reviving the economy. I personally, again, to come to this unification, and you ask specifically, where does unification stand as a priority? I'm a believer in working, first of all, trying to have a thinking of compromise, to have a thinking of let's first of all fix the problems, the urgent problems that are crippling our survival. Let's fix that. When we can fix that, we can talk about what should our relationship be. Once we have that hierarchy of needs, like there's a hierarchy of needs, as you all know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we need to take care of the basics, like survival. So once we have taken care of survival, that's when we can think about, okay, we've solved the most urgent problems. Now we can think about progress. And progress, I believe, is to heal from the past and to try to find a new formula for the Horn of Africa. And part of that will be, what is going to be our relationship with Somaliland? I'll tell you guys, Guled in particular, I would say to you, I understand where you are coming from. I understand that for you guys,
we will get to the portion of the program where you two gentlemen would specifically address each other, and I will give you guys that opportunity. And it's the main reason we're hosting this program, is to get a different perspective and a narrative from a younger generation's perspective in how to proceed and resolve some of these issues that are lingering, which are, like you said, our elders look at it from a different perspective. After 61 years. And half of it with the fragmentation, we just wanted to see if there could be a different type of conversation revolving around Somalia and Somaliland and how we move forward in resolving individual issues each would have on their side. So if I may go to Guled, Somaliland is not immune to some of the issues that are ongoing on in the Horn of Africa, specifically with the eastern provinces, grievances, the lack of power sharing, some of the stuff that comes to the forefront, the issues that comes without having a recognition and getting the investment needed for a country, being linked to Somalia still, and the world recognizing Somaliland as part of Somalia still. When you look at all of those things and you weigh them, would you rank seeking independence, which 31 years didn't really bear any fruit? Would that be should that be the priority of Somalilanders as we talk in 2021?
I think the priority of the average Somaliland citizen is to have a food on the table, and to get a health service and education, water, and the like. The basics are missing in most parts of the country. And that has to do a lot, not the absence of recognition, but the weakness of the governance system in place in Somaliland. Therefore, I will divide two issues. One is internal and one is external. And I think the two can be done in parallel. The government could have a proper foreign policy that is in pursuit of having better relations with the outside world in a recognition level or lower than that, so that you could attract investment, business, or you facilitate the movement of your citizens outside of the country. And the other one goes to the internal issues. And I think the internal issues are more easier and urgent than the external factors. Therefore, you could address the service delivery of your institution, the anti-corruption mechanism, transparency and inclusivity, condition of equality of all citizens, and ensuring the power is shared among different communities equally and fairly. Therefore, in short, there are a lot of work Somaliland government has to do if it wants to survive in such rough situation. And let's not forget that the Horn of Africa is already a very troubled region. Therefore, unless you have a better strategy and you outsmart our money, the chance of survival is very high. And I think it's a question for all Somalis, Somaliland, Somalia, and Djibouti as well. I think we should focus and talk about the survival of the Somali people rather than the positions, because our survival is at risk. We are a very small population. We live in a very strategic location that attracts many foreign powers, neighbors, and some powers far. And unless we, create sort of cohesion among ourselves and trust and confidence, we will be a prey for strong enemies. And I think one of the concerns I have, particularly from Somalia, is that instead of focusing peace building and reconstruction of the country, proper Somalia, the policy of the leaders there is always about unification and reunification. And I think they use unification as an excuse for their failure to start peace building in the country and reconciliation. Someone from Galka'i, a city divided on clan lines, cannot talk about unification, cannot tell me a union of Somalia and Somalia, because I would otherwise say, first and foremost, you need to have a proper government in your own place. Then we can start talking about how we can live together. Therefore, we are doing our mistakes, I believe. Sometimes our leaders use a very heated and unnecessary remarks that sometimes create animosity. And I believe the Somali people should not hate one another. We should love one another and try to sort of a way we can live together and think about our survival and sustainable development.
Quickly, if I may add, my next set of questions revolves around interactions you gentlemen, both Guled, Ahmed, Jama, and Mohamed Warsame, the interactions you guys have with each other, for example. When you're talking to a non-Somalilander, what sort of message do you convey? What does it look like for you to talk to non-Somalilanders? And if you will, let's have you address Mohamed directly, if you will. Yeah,
honestly, depends on who. I have friends and colleagues from Somalia, in the human rights field or the legal field. And there are many people from Somalia who live in Hargeisa, and we interact almost in daily lives on that matter. The Somali people in their individual personal life level don't hold grudges. They know how to work together. We speak the same language. And but I think when it comes to what Somaliland has to do, I feel offensive, very offensive if someone tries to tell me how I should run my own country. Because I would prefer my brothers and sisters to leave me alone and leave me decide that. Because what we did in 1960, we had all the opportunities, all the legal mandate to be independent and separate country. But we decided to unite with Somalia. That was voluntary. That was seen by many foreigners and many other countries as a reckless decision. But we did it because we loved unity. The unity didn't come from Mogadishu, it came from Hargeisa. We haven't received the reception we anticipated. Therefore, today we wanted to take another direction and to test that with love, of course, with Somalis. But if I am told that you cannot do that, then I will go very defensive. And I think that's not the kind of conversation we should have here. The conversation should go around, okay, let Somalia live as it wants, and let Somaliland live as it wants. Maybe at the end of the day, in the near future, in the coming generations, they may come up with different arrangements that they can live together. They can have a sort of united front in terms of defense, foreign policy, economy, but still continue having different stages, different independent stages. Because the issue of unity here in Hargeisa is almost impossible. 31 years is very long. The majority of the people, like 70% of the population in Somaliland, haven't seen the Somali flag. They have seen only the Somaliland flag. That's the way the people think now. Therefore, trying to push people back in a scenario they have never seen, a scenario whenever they remember horror and devastation and destruction of the entire cities, I think is not a good option.
Okay. Mohamed, similar question. When you interact, you've kind of talked about having friends that still believe in reunification, but in general terms, those ardent independence-seeking Somalilanders, when you have a conversation with them, what does it look like? What do you try to convey, and what would you tell Guled straight up? Like, what would your point of view be?
Right, as I've mentioned, the kind of interactions that I have with Somalilanders, first of all, the vast majority of people that I know are separatists. So they believe in this this decision, or this one to retract this union that they have voluntarily entered, as my brother Guled said, and it's for me, it has always been, I grew up actually with the vast majority of Somalis that I've known were Somalilanders in Germany, where I grew up, and it was never so that they were most of the Somalis that I knew, and so we used to kind of have a very strong connection, strong relationship. And of course, when you live in a European land where you are a foreigner and you are a minority, you're only maybe 20,000 people in a country of millions of millions, I think these differences were not emphasized. But I noticed that as soon as my friends kind of went back home, they went to Hargeisa, they went to Berbera, they went to Bora, they went back home, they kind of heard these tales that Guled was talking about, the horrors of the civil war, the horrors of the military regime, of the resistance to the military regime, and all of these things. And they would come back and the attitude would change to me. You see, I saw some of them, you know, one of my childhood friends, he was telling me the first day, I remember, and I'll never forget this, when he came back from Hargeisa, he was saying, you know, you and me, we are like brothers, and you know, I have no problem whatsoever. Don't misunderstand me, but I don't like to hear this Somalia thing. You know, Hargeisa will be Somaliland, and Mogadishu, it will be Somalia, and that's for the better, you know. And we never spoke about politics or anything. So that kind of you know, struck a chord with me. So I understood from that moment that there's a lot of, you know, emotion attached to. There's a lot of sentiment attached to this narrative of being being a separate state after a failed union. This narrative is very, very strong. And as someone who understands people's, who respects people's views and people's feelings and sentiments, I've always avoided this topic of union and, independence and things like that. But
right.
so
right.
for
the time's sake, let's go to our next question. It seems to me that this week, which should have been celebrated for what it is, which was when both Somaliland and Somalia got their independence and united, instead of celebrating that, I think it became a wedge issue. It became a grievance airing issue. It became politicized, and it's not celebrated as much as it should have been. Who do you think is to blame for that? I know we touched on, as per Mohamed said, how people use this occasion to go to social media and espouse to certain ideas. Do you think the idea of reunification versus separation became a weaponized identity between Somalis instead of conveying a proper conversation with each other in where we should be going? What do you guys think of weaponizing this occasion? Let me go to quickly to Mohamed first.
I think it's a very, very toxic weaponizing this conversation. And so yeah, I understand very well where you are coming from. This whole scenario of Alankan Wakegi. Like I saw there was a very strong campaign to basically say, the people of Borama and the people of Awdal and the people of Sol, the people of Lasanon, young people being brought together to display that they are loyal to Somaliland more so than to Somalia, to counteract this narrative that Somaliland is a one clan project. That's the narrative that we have been sold in Somalia. So that's what we have been sold. And of course, there's the story on the ground, the reality, as my brother Guled was saying, people aren't as much political in their daily lives. Everybody is trying to make a living, is trying to have opportunity, economic and social progress, right? So this whole politicized patriotism or nationalism is something that is kind of, it is, for me, I see it as a continuation of the civil war on a narrative level. So there's this narrative, it's a one clan project. It's just a clan project, and it's nothing to do with real nationhood. And on all these other minorities that don't belong to that one central clan are all forced to buy this or forced to swallow this narrative of separation. So that's the view from the south. And the view from the north is, guys, you have your 1st July and we have our day. We have our days and you have your days. And I think that is, there's no benefit in that. I think it doesn't advance the debate in any meaningful way. I think people should be reserved. People should kind of try to practice restraint. You see, people should, because there's no benefit in that. It's a whole. So for me to say, these Somalilanders is just one clan project, and I search for people from Borama who believe in union, and I give them the Somalia flag, and I tell them to show it in the social media to belittle the people of Hargeisa and the rest of them, is, I think, counterproductive. So I think both sides that are engaging in this battle on social media, in this battle of hearts and minds, they're not gaining anything. It's just a continuation of the civil war, in my view. And I think we need to be grown up. As Guled was saying, we need to think bigger. We need to realize that in the Horn, if we don't find a formula, to coexist, and of course, part of that is the first step that Somalis from Somalia, that we first of all revive what was once Italian Somaliland or Somalia Italiana. We need to revive that, and we need to have something on the plate to be able to reach out to others and to talk about some kind of bigger unity. We need to first of all fix our house before we can create a neighborhood watch, before we can create a neighborhood organization. And I think engaging in this battle and engaging in any sort of toxic conversation makes only things worse.
What do you think of the Independence Week being used as a wedge issue, and it being weaponized, and what would it contribute? Both parties are saying, one is saying, the unification is the way to go, while Somalilanders are saying, no, we're going our own way. If 26th June and July 1st is weaponized, it doesn't work on that level. It doesn't really achieve what the parties are saying they wanted to achieve. Who is responsible for that, and what would you, how would you advise people who are partaking in these endeavors?
I think the politicians in both sides are using this issue for short-term political gains, personal political gains. Somalia is the election season. Somaliland is also in election season. The presidential election is upcoming. We had one election this year. Therefore, the issue of unification or independence are most of the time using politicians for their gain. And that's what is happening now. Therefore, it has nothing to do with seriousness. It has nothing to do with the interests of Somaliland or the interests of Somalia. I think serious, genuine discussion need to happen about how these matters should be solved. But heated and emotionally charged statements provide no good interest for no one. It's neither good for Somalia nor for Somaliland.
Right, and for finally, Mohamed Warsame, at what point do your generation take the helm on this issue, and which way, we're at a crossroads, which way should we continue down the path we've been on the last 61 years, or should we reignite a new conversation revolving around the core issues Somalis in general are facing?
Yeah, that's a very, very big question and a tough one as well. But I genuinely believe that the solution will come only from the younger generations, because the older generations, there's the same old cassette still kind of the old software is still installed. I was seeing a senior advisor of the current president in Somalia recently. This is in 2020. A couple of months ago, saying on TV, we need to, what would you say, what is the solution to the Somaliland Somalia relationship? And he was like, we need to call them in a brotherly way and say, guys, you're wrong, come back to the fold. And if they don't come brotherly, then it must be solved militarily. So it's this thinking that, and it's this wrong thinking that, Somalia is like the United States, for example. And this is the analogy that many people always bring. The United States fought the southern states to preserve the union. I think we need to move away from that. There are many countries like Korea, for example, or Germany, for example, that divided and then reunited again, right? So that had this constant division and unification, and so I believe, and I think I told this to you over the phone. I think for Somalis, for the younger generation at least, and I think I'm not alone in this. There are many young people in Somalia that have a more mature outlook to the outlook of the past, that have a more reasoned outlook, that realize that nothing can be achieved militarily. Tigray in Ethiopia is the prime example. These are 8 million people, and the central government could not subjugate them and could not make them toe the line. So military conflict is for me is out of the question. So this idea that you can force people into some kind of political union by the barrel of the gun or by military might, I don't think that kind of thinking will work in the 21st century. I think what we need to offer something as Somalis to bring that conversation up, and we need to bring in a new formula. So, for example, Germany is where I grew up, and Germany had East Germany, West Germany, and they were separated for several decades and reunited again. I think Germany offers a very good example for researchers, for intellectuals to draw lessons upon. So what were the factors that caused the split? Geopolitical factors, not so much grievances, but rather geopolitical forces that caused Germans to split. And what brought them together? It was that sense of Germanness. It was the sense of, that together we are stronger, together we have more. The plate will be bigger. And as Somalis, we need to understand that, first of all, we need to create the plate. So as a Somali from Somalia, I would love to see Somalia revive its own nationhood, revive its own glory, so to say. You know, once we have our plate ready, once we have stuff to offer, then we can speak. I think then we can kind of think of a formula. Then we can think about how can we reconfigure this whole Horn of Africa peacefully. I think that is my view.
Right. As for you, Guled, your final comment on the path to a different set of conversations revolving issues in general that Somalis are facing in Horn of Africa, and specifically the Somaliland conversation. I think we've been at a pace where it was one step forward, two steps backwards for the last 31 years, be they official or unofficially. Do you see staying the course as a solution, or do you foresee a different type of conversation, or the need for a different type of conversation should be arising from your generation?
But when it comes to the Somali people, I think the narrative is very wrong. From Mogadishu, from Hargeisa, it is the older generations who failed us, who are still dictating the narrative. The old guards of Mohamed Warsame, the military generals, are still sitting in Mogadishu and dictating the terms. And I find it very hard to listen to anyone who sits beside former military general of Warsame and tells me unification or anything good, because that's not something acceptable in any way. Therefore, there should be some sort of justice in place so that people who committed war crimes and crimes against humanity are brought to justice, but they should not be rewarded. Secondly, Somalia should put in order in itself. Somalia should get away and then leave alone Somaliland and come up with a discussion about how we, as the two different states, can have a better solution. Why are we very obsessive with Westphalian state system? We can have a better solution. We can have different states with a different governments, but who share almost everything else. Look at the European Union. You know, the states are not relevant. Borders don't exist. We could have that in our small scale level in Somali Peninsula. But if we become, stuck with 1960s and first try, I think we must have reunification and then try to look at the best way to do that. We are almost lost because we lost in 1960. But if we step back and say, forget about that, let us have a different arrangement for the Horn of Africa, for the Somalis, for the continent, we will be able to get a solution. But otherwise, we will end up in the military intervention, because such heated and emotional policies end up with violence. But if we come back our discussion rationally with reasonable terms, we could get a solution. We're less than 20 million people. We're like 15 to 5 million people who all know one another, speak the same language. We can find a solution. But we cannot find a solution if we dictate the terms from Mogadishu as they were in 1980s. If we still listen the former military generals and they are the advisors of the president in Mogadishu, that's very difficult. And I think it's very difficult for everyone in Somaliland. Then it drifts away in Somaliland. The discussion becomes almost impossible. Therefore, my question is, and I don't want to answer now, the question is, why are we asking how to have reunification? Can we turn the question upside down? Can we say, how we have a Somaliland separate, but share something with Somalia?
Perhaps that's another question for another time, but I think we can conclude by thanking you, both gentlemen, Mohamed Warsame and Guled Ahmed Jama. Guled is a Somaliland lawyer, and he's a human rights defender, where Mohamed Warsame is in Britain, and he's a poet and an academic. He studied economics, and he writes poetry as well. I couldn't thank you guys enough for your time today and for the great discussion that we had. And I think it would spark a new way of having these discussions among Somalis. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.